Well, hello and welcome to another version of the Word for the Week. Here's the old game. Where is Simon today? Well, I don't know if you can spot it, but today I'm above the Llyn Brianna Dam. The spillway is just over there behind me. Above Llandirmwyn in the heart of Wales, above Llandyfri. And I'm not that far from Twm Sion Catti's cave. In fact, the bandit Twm Sion Catti used to live just down the road, but mercifully he hasn't been here for a while, so I don't feel so threatened the way things stand here at the moment anyway. I think the biggest risk to me today is tourists who've perhaps come up here, they don't realise there's a change in the weather, there's a named storm coming in, and they're sat in their cars shivering, running the engines and keeping the heaters on. But given that's the case, perhaps we'd better get on with the job in hand today. James chapter 3 verses 1 to 12. Last August, 2 men were sent to prison for stirring up hatred and violence online after the Southport attack. Jordan Parler, 28 years old, was jailed for 20 months after pleading guilty to inciting racial hatred with Facebook posts in which he advocated an attack on a hotel in Leeds as part of the violent public disorder that swept England last year. And in Northampton, Tyler Kay, 26, was given 3 years and 2 months in prison for posts on X that called for a mass deportation and for people to set fire to hotels housing asylum seekers. Now, these were the first people to be charged for posting criminal messages online in the UK linked to the recent far-right violence. Kay also posted a screenshot of another message inciting action against unnamed immigration solicitors in Northampton, and other posts attributable to him showed a desire to be involved in organised protests in the town. Rosemary Ainsley, acting head of the CPS, Crown Prosecution Service Special Crime and Terrorism Division, said, "It's important that I make it absolutely clear. Online actions have real consequences." Kay wrote about setting fire to hotels, amplified posts advocating action against immigration solicitors. And this online behaviour will not be tolerated, she said. He was convicted only a day after he made the social media posts. That shows just how quickly offenders such as Kay will be brought to justice. And she said the CPS will continue to act swiftly and robustly to tackle such behaviour. You can look it up on the CPS website. And then at the same time, we have Elon Musk reposting video which seems to show police officers arresting a man for making offensive comments on Facebook, and then he saw fit to comment, quote, "Arrested for making comments on Facebook, !" wrote Musk. Is this Britain or the Soviet Union? Is this accurate at Community Notes? Well, he also seems free in his speech to refer to state enforcement of anti-incitement laws as evidence there's going to be civil war in the UK. Arguably putting ideas in people's heads, arguably, or at least encouraging them. What do you think? Are words powerful, and do they matter or not? Well, yes, obviously our passage today is James chapter 3 verses 1 to 12, and this passage warns about the power and danger of the tongue, of speech. And that's structured in James 3 around 3 key moments. First, there's a warning to teachers in verses 1 to 2. Few should become teachers because they face stricter judgment. Influencers, teachers. And the central premise there is that controlling the tongue is the same as self-mastery. If we could control our tongues, we would be perfect. And then second moment, the tongue's disproportionate power gets highlighted in verses 3 to 6 of James 3, with 3 vivid analogies, emphasising how something small controls something large. A horse is controlled by a bit. A small bit directs the large horse. A ship is steered by a rudder. A small rudder steers a huge vessel through strong winds and so on. And a spark, a tiny spark, can start a massive fire in a forest with huge destruction to follow. And then there's this issue about the tongue's untamable nature, verses 7 to 12. Humans tame all creatures, but no one can tame the tongue. It's described as a restless evil, full of deadly poison. Then fourthly, James highlights a core problem, verses 9 to 10, hypocrisy. The same mouth praises God, yet curses people made in God's image. And then verses 11 to 12, James finishes with some rhetorical questions. Nature doesn't produce contradictions. Fresh water, bitter water. Figs, olives. And we'll see what he's getting at there in a minute. Now that basic outline explains James's movement from a warning based in moral and ethical logic, do not become teachers, through evidential premises, all stumble in many ways, to vivid examples and finally an ethical indictment. And the main message is this. Speech is immensely powerful, dangerously difficult to control, and reveals profound spiritual inconsistency when used to both bless and to curse. Well, let's dig into that a bit more adequately now. Firstly, he kicks off with this warning to teachers about their responsibility, verse 1. The New International Version says, "Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly." We all stumble in many ways, says James. Anyone who's never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. I find the New Living Translation at this point a little bit more helpful. It's a more dynamic translation, making the meaning clearer at this point. Dear brothers and sisters, not many of you should become teachers in the church. And that's the point, you see, the context dictates. Should become teachers in the church. For we who teach will be judged more strictly. Indeed, we all make many mistakes. For if we could control our tongues, we'd be perfect and could also control ourselves in every other way. James is opening this chapter with this striking prohibition. You shouldn't, many of you, want to become teachers. And the Greek construction here, me polygyneste, is a negative command in the present tense, second person plural. And the present tense is significant because it implies ongoing action, a general prohibition, something like, do not be in the habit of trying to be. Do not continue trying to make yourselves into teachers. It isn't about a single past decision to do something, but about an ongoing choice. Avoid entering this role of being this major influencer, he says. And he uses the verb geneste, to become, to make oneself, rather than a passive construction, you sit back and it happens to you. It keeps the command active and dynamic. It focuses on people actively seeking, assuming the role of influencer, teacher. James telling them avoid it. Avoid becoming what exactly, James? Avoid becoming, the word is didaskalos, teacher, instructor, one who influences the ideas of others. And in New Testament ethical context, this is a technical vocational term carrying weight and responsibility. It's a role. It refers to an official teacher, someone who has presumed the authority to speak with instructional power, and that has been given to them. Now, both the verb didasko, to teach, and the noun didaskalos, the teacher, signal authority and accountability in equal measure. That's the point. And with that warning comes a motivation. You should already know better, says James. The warning is, immediately followed by this. Don't presume to become a teacher knowing that is a perfect participle. It refers to background knowledge, a cognitive fact already in place. The audience is expected to be aware of what comes next. Don't presume to be teachers. And then the perfect tense strengthens the prohibition rhetorically. You cannot claim ignorance. You already know this. What do you know already that should limit you in these aspirations? You know this. We will receive greater judgment. Now the language is inclusive, everybody in this situation, and it is urgent. Teachers are subject to stricter, more severe judgment. Those who seek to inform, to instruct, to form the thoughts and ideas of others are subject to greater judgment. There's greater consequence for those who teach. And this is the motive clause, the reason for prohibiting many from presuming to take on this influencing role. The clever people who write about this stuff, they tell us that verse 1 functions as a precautionary speech act, a warning addressed to the community. Do not let many of you seek to become teachers, my brothers, knowing that we who teach will face stricter judgment. Why is it a problem? Why is it a problem then to seek to be a teacher? Here's the universal problem, secondly. Verse 2, second major moment. James is beginning with a sweeping statement about human weakness. We all stumble. Ptaimen hapantes. We all stumble. He then narrows this general observation with a specific claim. Only a perfect person, teleos aner, could truly control their tongue. That figures, doesn't it? He's acknowledging a reality. The verb stumble, pateo, it appears twice in slightly different forms here. First, we stumble includes everyone in this universal human tendency to slip up. We do. That's human nature. But secondly, he uses the verb again, stumbles, referring to an individual, emphasizing that speech is precisely where this failure happens to each one of us. James is setting an impossibly high bar. If someone never stumbles in what they say, that person would be perfect, would be capable of controlling their entire self. But we all stumble in many ways, you see. Reconstruction here is telling. James frames perfection as a matter of capability. The perfect person would be able to bridle their tongue. The verb to bridle there is particularly evocative. Technical terms suggesting decisive control, not gradual improvement, but a single complete act of self-mastery. And the verb choice is no accident. It anticipates the vivid image that James is about to use in verse 3, where he'll compare controlling the tongue to using a bit to control a horse. The metaphor is already embedded in the vocabulary itself. We're coming to it. We're coming to it because here's the third moment in all that James is saying. These pictures warning against underestimating the power of the spoken word, of the written word, of the tongue, verses 3 to 6. The power of the tongue. Three metaphors. Now, that word for tongue there, the Greek word glossa, it carries a double meaning that James exploits throughout this passage. In Koine Greek, it referred both to the physical organ in your mouth, right, that, and to speech itself. What we mean when we say someone has a sharp tongue, it refers to the language we use with the tongue. And James plays with that dual meaning to build his moral argument. The same physical organ that produces words of praise can also produce curses and so on. He works like that. So James is developing this idea through three vivid metaphors then about the tongue, the glossa, each illustrating how something tiny can have outsized effects. Firstly, the horse's bit. Small instrument of control, large impact. James signals for us this shift from abstract principle to concrete example with attention-grabbing words. He says, behold, idu, and so it is, hutos. These are classic markers in ancient wisdom literature, classic language markers, inviting a reader to move from argument to imagination, to picture what he's describing. Oh, we underdo the value of the imagination in understanding and living in a Christian way. So there's this horsey image then. It's very straightforward. A bit is placed in a horse's mouth, a piece of metal barely, 12 or 15 centimetres wide, controlling an animal over 2 metres long. That's a ratio, I reckon, check my maths, of about 1 to 15 or 1 to 18, meaning the bit is only 5 to 7% of the length of the entire creature that it governs. And in his world, that everyday piece of technology becomes James's analogy for the tongue, a small organ that exercises disproportionate control over the entire person. And that bridle metaphor carries several implications. First, it suggests that control is a skill, techne, something learned through practice, not automatic. Secondly, it emphasizes responsibility, particularly for teachers and leaders whose words carry weight. And thirdly, it insists that control is possible, the tongue can be mastered, though imperfectly, it's an ongoing task, and only by a disciplined person. The bridle, the horse. Secondly, the ship's rudder. A small piece of kit, but large directional consequences. James shifts from the land to the sea. Here's his second image, the ship's rudder. On ancient merchant vessels like the well-studied Madrague de Jean wreck, the steering oar was about 4 to 5 metres long. On a ship, 30 to 35 metres in total length, a ratio of roughly 1 to 7 or 1 to 8. The rudder blade itself was less than 1 metre wide on a vessel with an 8 to 10 metre beam, making it about 10% of the ship's width. But James isn't simply repeating the small controls large theme here. You see, the rudder adds a crucial dimension. It adds not simply control, but direction specifically. And while the bit restrains and governs, the rudder steers. Here's James's point. Words steer people. Alarmingly, our own words, what we tell ourselves, end up being what we actually believe and then become who we are. Psychologists will speak of an internalized narrative. An internalized narrative is the personal story we tell ourselves about who we are, where we come from, where we're going, where we fit in. And these self-stories often develop from family culture, past experience, repeated messages we've absorbed over time. And once internalized, they act like a script, shaping how we interpret events and how we respond to life. For example, someone who has internalized the narrative, "I always mess things up," may approach new opportunities with fear and hesitation, unconsciously confirming that story. But in contrast, reframing your narrative toward hope or resilience, well, it'll have the opposite effect on you. And then there's, secondly, cognitive self-perception. Cognitive self-perception theory suggests that we learn about ourselves in part by observing our own behaviours and listening to the words we use. Just as we infer others' characters from what they say and do, we draw conclusions about who we are in the same way. So if we repeatedly hear ourselves saying, "I'm bad at maths," or "I'm bad at public speaking," our mind interprets this evidence that we must be bad at those things, reinforcing the belief, shaping future performance. And that shows that self-description is not neutral. Our language feeds back into how we define our identity and our abilities to do. And of course, we've all heard of autosuggestion. Autosuggestion is the practice, often conscious, sometimes unconscious, of trying to influence our own mind through repeated words, affirmations or images. Popularised by the French psychologist Émile Coué in the early 20th century. It's not a new idea. It emphasises consistent, positive self-statement can rewire thought patterns and behaviour, whether those are borne out in reality and evidence or not. What I'm trying to get at here is that our words definitely steer us. But our words don't just control our impulses. They set the course for our behaviour, how we run our relationships, and even how we live in our communities. A single spoken word can alter the trajectory of a group's entire conduct. That rudder metaphor, it highlights that what we might call indirect causation. Speech influences outcome, not through direct force, but through steering. And it also emphasises the social reach of words and the moral responsibility that comes with that reach. Your words serve as the rudder for more than just yourself. Horse and bit, ship and rudder. Thirdly, spark, small source, massive fiery destruction. See, that third metaphor shifts from control to danger. A spark of an ember, perhaps lighting the whole mountainside. Ancient writers like Tacitus and Strabo documented such wildfires in Mediterranean landscapes in the early era, and modern fire modelling confirms how devastatingly a tiny ignition source can spread. And the ratio there is staggering. Maybe 1 to 50,000. Maybe 1 to 100,000. A tiny spark, a huge fire. When James calls the tongue fire, he's moving from the possibility of control to the reality of destruction. Speech can produce cascading, uncontrollable damage. Reputations ruined, communities torn apart, violence unleashed. And this very day, there's been an attack at a synagogue in Manchester with people killed, and we think the perpetrator shot. You see the point? So often, the word is the mother of the violent deed. And James packs two contrasting ideas into his Greek here that create a dramatic tension. The tongue is both a little thing that boasts great things and simultaneously a whole world, a whole cosmos of unrighteousness that defiles the entire body and sets a person's whole life course ablaze. That paradox is not dramatic. It frames the tongue as both the agent of contagion and a symptom of deeper corruption, and we see it. We see it with our own eyes. Most striking is James's claim about the source. The tongue is set on fire by Gehenna, he says, a reference to hell itself. Well, the danger is obvious. The tongue's power isn't merely human. It traces back to darker cosmic forces of wickedness on a huge scale. And modern linguistic theory confirms James's intuition about contagion. A single utterance can perform damage that cascades outward, affecting not just the immediate hearer, but rippling through entire social networks. One careless word can indeed set a life and many lives on fire. How do those three metaphors work together? Notice the escalation of disproportionateness.
The size ratio between rudder and ship for a 1st century Greco-Roman trading vessel would have been about 1 to 8, the ship being 8 times bigger than its rudder. The size ratio between the length of the bit in the mouth of a Roman cavalryman's horse and the length of the horse itself would have been about 1 to 15. And while it's more difficult to work this one out because of variability in the parameters, it's a fair guess to say that the size ratio of a fire-raising spark to the extent of the resulting wildfire's devastation lies in excess of 1 to 50,000. Overall, that's a pretty hefty escalation as these verses progress.
And it's that progression that underscores James's rhetorical point. The tongue, once unleashed, is not just small, but powerful. It is disproportionately, even cosmically, consequential. Three images form a picture that James intends us to listen to. The bridle shows that speech can be controlled with discipline and mastery to some extent, but a horse is always going to move under you, whatever. Secondly, the rudder shows that speech directs public communal life. And thirdly, the spark shows that speech destroys when uncontrolled. Contagion, defilement, eschatological peril. Biblical proportions, as they say. James wants to show teachers and communities why speech matters. Matters particularly in terms of long-lasting outcomes. Alarmingly though, James now makes a stark assertion. He says humans can't tame the tongue, or seem to. Every kind of wild animal seem to be able to tame, but no one can tame the tongue. That's verses 7 to 8, and we've got that far already. The untamable tongue. The tongue, James says, is incalcitrant. Now, incalcitrant's a wonderful word, isn't it? It captures perfectly what James is describing. Stubborn, unyielding resistance to control. And the word comes from the Latin calcitrare, to kick. And it paints a picture of something that kicks back against anyone trying to master it. If you've ever had a young bull on a rope like that, you'll know exactly what I mean, trying to train one of them. Well, James's grammar here creates a deliberate contrast with what came before. Remember in verse 2, James said the perfect person would be able to bridle the tongue. Capability there was the key word. But now in verses 7 to 8, he uses the same root, but negatively. Humans are not able to. He uses the same verb, donate and udonate. Not able to tame it. And the rhetorical reversal is very pointed. What was theoretically possible for the perfect person is actually impossible for humanity in general. Of course it is. We're not perfect. And there's an implicit warning, especially for teachers. Anyone who stands up to instruct others or influence others is called to exemplify what they prescribe. But James has just exposed us all as likely to fall at controlling the very instrument we use to seek to influence others. It's a humbling, even a devastating reminder. In verses 9 to 12, James moves on to illustrate the inconsistency of the tongue, being able to produce both curses and blessings. And here he reaches his rhetorical and ethical climax. With the same tongue we bless God and we curse people made in God's image. That's the paradox at the heart of the problem. A moral inconsistency so glaring it demands resolution. Here's the contradiction laid bare. James's Greek deliberately places these two speech act verbs side by side. We bless, doxazomen, and we curse, katatrometha. He pairs them with objects that highlight the absurdity. We're doing these things to God and humans. God the Father, humans made in God's likeness. And the grammatical structure creates a kind of verbal collision. He uses parallelism and chiasms, a mirror image arrangement, to make the contradiction impossible to miss. He's hitting us with a brick, bless him. And the sting comes in the phrase, with the same tongue, or from the same mouth. One organ Two mutually exclusive acts, blessing and cursing. And that, lining those things up together, forces readers to confront the incoherency of our own speech. And then James hammers it home with an appeal to nature, what we observe in nature. James closes with rhetorical questions that appeal to that natural order. Classic move in wisdom literature. Does a spring pour out both fresh and salt water? Well, no, obviously not. Can a fig tree produce olives or a grapevine produce figs? Well, no, clearly not. Of course not. And these comparisons from springs and trees and plants argue for consistency, for congruity between source and output. If nature maintains such coherence, James suggests, shouldn't human speech, especially speech directed toward God and God's image bearers, shouldn't it do the same? The appeal to natural order becomes a call for ethical coherence, consistency, let's say that, in both speech and life. Well, deep stuff, big thoughts. Thank you, James. You've taken us deep today. But what are we going to do? See, this isn't just a verse for Bible teachers, but for all of us. And it says we should not presume lightly to speak authoritatively, because words have got very powerful consequences, and we're bad at controlling our tongues. James has shown us something uncomfortable. Our tongues are both incredibly powerful and impossible to tame on our own. We can train horses, we can steer ships, we can even put out fires, but we can't master our own mouth. And that's a very humbling sort of reality. So what's the way forward? Well, it's time to bring this podcast and this message home. So what is actually the way forward? I'm going to try to suggest three practical things. First, recognize the real power. We need to take our words seriously. So here's the first step. Stop diminishing your words as just anything, just venting, just joking, just being honest, just my opinion. Your WhatsApp message, your comment under that post, your words to your children at breakfast, they are bits, they are rudders, and they are sparks. Secondly, we need to recognize our real inability. We need to admit we can't do this alone. James makes this crystal clear. No human being can tame the tongue. And if you're sitting there now thinking, I just need to try harder, be more careful, think before I speak, that's good. But it isn't enough. It's not going to work. Because the tongue reveals what's in the heart. Jesus said, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Matthew 12:34. If bitter water and fresh water are coming from the same spring, the problem isn't at the mouth of the spring, it's at the source. We need a new heart. And a heart that we go on getting inwardly renewed day by day as we go back to God about it. That is not self-improvement. That's transformation. That's the gospel continually at work in the human Christian heart. Third thing, well, receive the real help. This is where James's letter has been pointing us all along. Remember chapter 1, verse 5? If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. And the wisdom from above, he says in James 3:17, the wisdom from above is pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. That's the only wisdom that can tame our tongues. And it's a gift. But we need to actively and conscientiously ask God for it. So here's what I'm asking you to do this week, maybe. Pray specifically about your speech, maybe each morning. Lord, set a guard over my lips today. Give me wisdom from above. Let my words build up and not tear down. Something else practical. Pause before you post, text or speak. Literally, perhaps count to 3. Ask, is this true? Is this kind? Is it necessary? Would I say this if Jesus was standing right here next to me? Spoiler alert. He is. Apologize when you fall. You will fall. We all do. When you speak harshly, gossip, exaggerate or wound with words, own it. Own it. Go back, say, I was wrong, I'm sorry. Please, will you forgive me for that? Somebody might really need to find an accountability partner. Ask someone, will you help me watch my words? Will you call me out when I'm using my tongue to do anything other than bless? Friends, here's the good news. The same God who created the universe with his word is able to redeem our words. The same Jesus, who is called the Word made flesh, can transform our speech from the inside out. We may not be able to tame our tongues, but the Holy Spirit can. And it's time to rebel against the spirit of our age and stop pretending our words don't matter. It's time to stop trusting ourselves to control our words. It's time to start asking God for the wisdom from above that makes our speech a source of life, not death, blessing, not cursing, light, not fire. As those who are conscious, we're accountable for our words. Well, that's my word for the week. I hope it's helpful in navigating the world in which we currently live. And I hope it's helpful in helping us practically, day by day, to master the words that come from our lips. If that's been of any interest, any help, hit me up in the messages. Love to hear from you. If I can pray for you about something in particular, please let me know. Happy to do that. But for the moment, that is my word for the week. And I hope you have a really good week.